Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today is the start of another weekly reading vlog. Now, in honor of Pride, the theme of this week's reading vlog is going to be queer horror classics and backlist books. Now, if you have seen any of my videos before, then you know that we do not just read queer books in Pride Month, we read queer all year round here, and I definitely encourage everyone to pick up queer fiction all year, not just during the month of June. However, there are some books that have been on my TBR forever, so I really want to prioritize them this week, so that is what we're going to do. I do not have a really large set TBR for this video because I am still at my heart a mood reader, but the two books that we're absolutely going to be getting to in this vlog would be the Gilda stories by Jewelle Gomez. This is a book that came out in the 90s and it is about a black vampire and a black sapphic vampire. So this is a modern classic, or more of a modern classic just based on the other book on my TBR, but I'm really excited about this one. I really love vampire fiction. I really in particular like queer vampire fiction. Most of my favorite vampire stories do have those either queer undertones or are just very overtly queer with queer characters. So I'm looking forward to checking this one out. And then the next book on my TBR is like one of the classics. I feel like a lot of people know about this one, and I know it's crazy that I haven't read this yet, but The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I've never read this one before. I know that there is now like an uncensored and uncut version out there that is textually a lot more queer on the page than the original version because cuts were made because of the time, because it came out in the 1800s. I could not get my hands on that one, so I am going to be reading the, I guess, classic edition, and then perhaps later on in the year we'll try and find the uncut and uncensored version. But this is about a man who has this beautiful painting done of him, and he makes a Faustian bargain where the painting will age instead of him. But those are the two classics that we're going to be reading this week. I'm also going to be, of course, reading a lot more queer horror fiction and focusing on my backlist. So I'm going to try my very hardest to have the rest of these books be published in like 2019 or previously, just to get to some of those books that maybe aren't priority on my TBR and that have been sitting on my TBR shelf for a while. I am really excited about this vlog. I'm really excited to get to these stories because, number one, I think it's really cool to focus on queer classics because books that came out such a long time ago prove that, you know, queer people, we've always been here, and we've always been in literature and in fiction and in real life too, being able to find queer representation in older books, especially in horror fiction, which is my favorite genre, is just so exciting. So I'm really excited for a week of queer backlist reads. So I cannot wait to dive into these books. I believe I am going to start with the Gilda stories by Jewelle Gomez. So I'm going to go get to reading and I will check back in with y'all later. Hey vlog, time for a reading update. I am now about 20% of the way through the Gilda stories and I'm really enjoying it so far. I have such a great feeling about this one. I am really immersed in the story already, and while this is kind of on the shorter side for the amount of time that it covers, the first chapter, all of the chapters are set in a different time period in our main characters' lives. Chapter 1 starts in Louisiana. The year is 1850 and this book is going to go all the way up in until 2050, so I'm really intrigued to read that. And I did see there's a chapter that is in 2020, and because this book was written in the 90s, I'm really curious to see kind of how those aspects play into this. But the historical fiction parts of this are really working for me. I'm really enjoying already. We're seeing vampirism slowly be introduced to our main character as a concept 20% into the story. But what I really love is the found family that's being built, and I think one of the things I'm really going to love is seeing the way in which these vampire women are pushing the boundaries of how they can advocate and create a life for both themselves and other women around them based on the constraints of the time. So in 1850, we are following, of course, this is right before the American Civil War, and we are following our main characters, and they are all living in a brothel and experiencing kind of the very limited agency that women could carve out during the time, and in terms of non-traditional career paths, or even having any sort of say in their future and who they want to spend time with, and creating this very sapphic, very queer found family. I'm really enjoying it. Again, 20% of the way, I'm not too far into this one, but I'm really enjoying what I'm reading so far. The writing really transports you to that sense of place and time, and I really enjoy vampire fiction that really focuses on found families, so I'm looking forward to continuing that one this week. And then I also think I'm going to pick up an audiobook because I'm reading this one as an ebook, and I like to have a couple of books being read at the same time. I do have a couple that I'm deciding between. I've got a lot of them checked out from my library via Libby, but I think what I'll pick up next is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado, and this is a collection of short stories, so I think this one could be really good. Like, I'll read a chapter in the Gilda stories and then read a short story in this audio collection, so I think that's what I'm going to pick up next. This collection came out in 2017, but ever since it came out, I just hear nothing but wonderful things about this collection, so I want to check it out. And I definitely think, you know, reading a book that is written in the 90s and then reading one in the 2010s, I think that'll be kind of a good juxtaposition of each other, just in terms of different tone and everything like that. When I'm reading one classic, I'd like something a little more contemporary. But yeah, I think those books will work really well together. So I am going to get back to reading, and I will check back in with y'all later with another reading update. Okay vlog, I am back with another reading update. This one's going to be just a little bit longer than the last one because a lot has happened. A lot of bookish updates, bookish adjacent updates, and then just in general updates for the vlog. So first off, I am 50% of the way through the Gilda stories. I'm really enjoying it. This one, I'd say the biggest thing is that every single chapter, like I mentioned before, focuses on a very different period of time in Gilda's life. And so the first couple of pages of each chapter, you find yourself trying to figure out, like, okay, where is she now? Because, you know, we'll switch from 1890 to 1920. That's a long span of time, and Gilda is in a different place each time, both physically and emotionally. emotionally and on her journey as a vampire a lot of times. So I'd say that's the biggest issue I suppose I have with this book so far. I don't think it's an issue, but just something to note if you are someone who likes a continuous story. Just know going into this one, it almost feels like a collection of short stories about Gilda, just because the lessons and the people she meets, like there is crossover from chapter to chapter, but the tone is really different for each chapter. And in large part, I think this is a really cool thing that Joel Gomez has done, because each period of time that has been captured so far like feels so true to that period of time. So just the historical fiction aspects of this one are really great. I'm really enjoying like the vampire lore that's being introduced in a lot of ways. These are very typical vampires, bloodsuckers, like they need blood to survive, and like the mythology of vampires is really interesting, just the little spins and the takes on the mythology that are introduced here. And Gilda as a main character is very interesting. As a vampire, I feel like a lot of times, you know, vampires are portrayed as like villainous or very like cruel and uncaring, and especially like older ones, they don't have their humanity anymore. But Gilda is very human, and the very human way that she still continues to interact with people, and just the kindness and using vampires and people almost as like a symbiotic relationship, very interesting for this one. So 50% of the way in, I'm still enjoying it. And then for my other reading update, I'm about 25% of the way through Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Machado. At this point in the short story collection, I have read 3 short stories: The Husband Stitch, Inventory, and Mothers, and by far my favorite has been The Husband Stitch. That one really got to me. I think this collection is very interesting. It is a horror collection, and in regards for the themes for this one, this says that Machado bends genre to shape startling narratives that map the realities of women's lives and the violence visited upon their bodies. So this one, very dark, knew that going in. It is horror, there's sci-fi elements. The first one has to deal with, it actually took quite a few different like urban myths and legends, in particular like the green ribbon around the woman's neck. It really played on that one in a very interesting way. And then the second story was also about the end of the world and just relations and human connection in the end of the world. And the third one was about motherhood, and it's very interesting. I feel like it's going to be very impactful. So 25% of the way in, I'm definitely enjoying this collection so far. The next short story I've heard the most about, it's especially heinous. I believe it's also one of the longer short stories in this collection, and I've heard a lot about it because in this one, Machado reimagines every episode of Law and Order Special Victims Unit. So I'm intrigued about that one because I've heard that you really need a familiarity with the show to appreciate this one, and I've seen a couple episodes, but by no means is it like a show that I sit down and watch a lot. I know like the main characters' names and the premise of the show, the premise of a police procedural, but I'm nervous about that one just because I've heard so much about it where people either really love it or really feel like they just aren't the target audience, or they really missed out on fully enjoying it because either they weren't Law and Order SVU fans, and if you're not, like, I think this one is harder to follow. So we'll see. I'm still optimistic because I have really enjoyed this story collection so far, but I would be lying if I didn't mention that I was a little nervous for that one because I've heard that's the most polarizing short story in this collection. But those are the books that I am currently reading. I do anticipate finishing up the Gilda stories today because 50% of the way through, it is like a shorter one, and I am really intrigued by the story. So I feel like that one I'll have no issue sitting down and reading through and finishing. And then next update, I do have a little bit of a haul, a little bit of a bookish haul, both from the library and then a small business. Let's do the small business one first because I just got in these candles from Get Fictional, not sponsored or anything like that. It's just a small business that I want to highlight on the channel, but I got these candles for Summerween. As you can tell by the titles and the names of these candles, they're going to be like the perfect Summerween candles. We've got Ghostface and Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th smells like fire roasted marshmallows and cinnamon. So absolutely spooky summer slasher vibes for this one. And then of course course, we have Ghost Face, which is blood red apple, gooey caramel, and dark brown sugar. I love bakery sweeter scents, and these ones, I just think the packaging is so cool, and it's perfect for summerween because I don't want to bust out like the fall candles just yet, because if you burn them year round as much as I would like to, like it doesn't have that special fall feeling when you finally pull out the fall scents. So I think these scents are going to be perfect for summerween because they've got that fun packaging, and then just like, you know, the toasted marshmallow and the campfire smell, and then the caramel apple smell. I just couldn't resist. I love caramel apple scented anything. So I'm very excited to burn both of those candles for summerween. I think they're the perfect gourmand scents to move from summer into fall. And then the next part of this bookish haul is just a little bit of a library haul, because I did manage to find the picture of Dorian Gray, which I'm excited about because I was originally going to listen to it via audiobook, and I still do plan on listening to this one via audiobook. However, I've noticed a lot of times with older classics, it's a lot easier for me if I read it physically and listen to the audiobook at the same time. I just find that that really helps me absorb classics better. So this copy is very beautiful. Shout out to my library. This is like such a fun copy, but I'm going to be reading this physically alongside audio now later on this week. And then I also found another book that I'd love to fit into this queer backlist horror vlog, and that's Queen of Teeth by Hailey Piper. I've read from Hailey Piper before. I enjoyed what I read, but I remember saying that it was a longer book, and I felt like a shorter book would have been perfect for this author, and this is a very short little novella, and I've heard this is bizarre feminist body horror, so I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to pick this one up, so we'll try and slot this in for later on during this vlog. Another little tangential update is not really reading at all. I guess it kind of is reading just because it's a movie adaptation, but yesterday, me, my partner, and a friend, we had a marathon of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the extended editions. So if you know, you know, that's an all-day commitment. And not only did we watch all 3 extended edition movies, which they're all like 4 hours long, it's a crazy amount of time, but we also like made themed food. So our friend made lembas bread and brought like a bunch of other snacks and hobbity food, like lentil soup, and we had like some charcuterie and like just like some cheeses and jams and breads, and my partner made shepherd's pie, and we just really enjoyed all of the Lord of the Rings movies. We had such a fun time yesterday. However, that was such a big time commitment, I didn't really get any reading done. Obviously, after watching those 3 movies, there was not a lot of time left in the day to read, so I am anticipating reading more today, and I also really am craving rereading the Lord of the Rings. Actually, not even rereading, just reading. I've only read The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring. I have not read Two Towers or The Return of the King. I know I watch like the movies every single year, and I absolutely love the Lord of the Rings. That's like me and my partners, that's like our fandom. And I know it's crazy that we haven't read it yet. We keep meaning to read it together, and I am definitely a bigger reader than my partner is, and I keep waiting for us to read it together. So maybe I can convince him later on this summer to have like a reading marathon where we can read all of those, because I love that world. I love that world. I love the characters. It's such a beautiful story. It makes me tear up every single time, especially like the last like 45 minutes to an hour of Return of the King. It really gets me. It really gets me, and I feel like I take away something different. Not even necessarily something different, but I just find like a new appreciation for something different about the story and the characters every single time I rewatch this series. So I would like to read these books. So maybe me and my partner will have to listen to those when we go on a road trip or something later on this year, because not only are they long movies, especially if you watch the extended editions, but they're very long books as well. So I'm really craving that. I'm not necessarily craving that like right now. I'm still feeling good about reading these horror books, but I'm thinking maybe, I mean, my July TBR is honestly quite stacked as well, so I have a feeling we'll probably return to Middle Earth sometime in August. That's what I'm thinking. But this has been quite a lengthy reading update. I am going to go finish the Gilda stories, and I will check back in later with another reading update for y'all. Hey vlog, it is time for a reading update. I did manage yesterday to finish Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Machado, and overall I enjoyed this collection. However, it was a very uneven collection for me. Not all of the stories really worked for me, in particular the one about Law and Order Special Victims Unit, especially Heinous. That was a collection, like it was a rewritten plot synopsis for like 12 seasons of that show, and I think if you love that show and just really are passionate about it, it's clear that the author is, then you'll like it. However, it was such a long story and it was such a slog to get through. Unfortunately, I tried to go in without a lot of preconceived notions, but I know going into this book, a lot of people had mentioned that especially Heinous was the most polarizing story in this collection, and I would have to agree. But my absolute favorite stories from the collection were The Husband Stitch, Inventory, and Real Women Have Bodies. And if you'll notice, the first two stories that I mentioned were the first two stories in this collection. So this collection started out so strong. I thought it was going to be like my favorite collection of all time, and just the other reading experiences were just more up and down for me. But I did really enjoy the blend of sci-fi and horror and just the commentary and the writing style. So I will check out more by this author. I would love to see, I know she has a non-fiction In the Dream House short story collection. It's kind of like a memoir, I believe, written in short story essay format, but I would love to check out like a full-length novel from this author. I really did enjoy the writing style. Just some stories really didn't work for me while others really did. So I'd still recommend you check this out, in particular for, I think The Husband Stitch honestly is the strongest story in this collection. I think that one you can find online just by itself. So if you want to pick up just one story from this collection, The Husband Stitch is definitely my favorite, and I think just the most impactful of this collection. But I enjoyed my time reading it, and I'm glad that I read it. I am still reading the Gilda stories by Jewelle Gomez. I'm 80% of the way through this one, and I am enjoying this. It does definitely feel like a collection of short stories, even though it's not. It's one continuous book. We're following Gilda the whole time, but every single chapter we get introduced to a new period of time in her life, and that's just, it's a little frustrating just because some of the chapters I love the other characters, and I really am intrigued about Gilda's relationships with them, platonic, romantic. Like I love that I get transported to a sense of place and time, and then just as you're really engaged, you're really immersed, you get thrown into another time period. There are some side characters that I would love to see more of, but right now we're in the 1980s, and I do believe this is the last time period that's not in the future, because the other ones I think are 2020 and 2050, and when this book was written, 2020 had not happened yet. So I'm intrigued to see like the futuristic aspects as we go into the last 20% of this book. I'm enjoying it overall. I just do wish that we could see some more of the other characters that Gilda surrounds herself with. Overall though, I am enjoying my time with this story, but now that I have finished Her Body and Other Parties, I'm definitely in the market for another audiobook, and I already have one lined up that I'm very excited about, and that would be The Route of Ice and Salt by Jose Luis Zarate, translated by David Bowles. And this is an audiobook. I've got it checked out from the library. It's 3 hours long, and this is a reimagining of Dracula's voyage to England. So it's filled with gothic imagery, queer desire, another vampire story. I know, I think that's very funny. We've got the Gilda stories. We're going to be checking out this reimagining of Dracula's voyage, and then of course I feel like the picture of Dorian Gray is a little vampire adjacent, just in terms of like the immortality and the tropes being discussed there. So I'm really intrigued to pick this one up. I had not heard about this one. It came out in February of 2022, at least the English translation, and I love a vampire story. So 3 hours, I don't anticipate it should take me very long to get through it, but I'm intrigued. So next update, hopefully we'll have finished the Gilda stories, potentially finish this one depending on how much time that I have to read today, but I'm definitely looking forward to it. But yeah, I'm excited. So I'm going to go immerse myself in some queer gothic vampire fiction, and I will talk to y'all later with another reading update. Okay, so this morning I finished the Gilda stories by Jewelle Gomez, and overall I enjoyed it. There were definitely things that just didn't work so much for me. I know I talked about some of them in the last update. However, for the last 20% of the book, I really tried to tailor my expectations and just kind of read the book in a little bit of a different way. So I changed my own personal expectations, and I just decided to treat it as a collection of short stories rather than a continuous narrative, and I think that really worked with how it was so segmented, with each chapter being a different period of time. I think retooling my expectations to expect that and expect that more chopped up narrative as opposed to a continuous narrative really helped me. And then also I wanted to try and read it as if I were reading it for an English class instead of just passively reading it and analyzing it and really dissecting what the story is talking about and the themes. I thought really helped enrich my reading experience. Because when I was reading this one, I noticed I loved the introduction, the foreword, and the afterword. And usually, I mean, I prefer like the story rather than the trimmings surrounding it. But I loved the analysis that we got during the introduction, the foreword, and the afterword. I believe the version that I read on Libby was the 20th anniversary edition of this book, and I really enjoyed that. It really heightened the reading experience, and I don't think I would have enjoyed this one as much if I didn't read all of those and enjoy them. The concept was absolutely incredible. I loved the focus on community. I love the focus that Gilda had on community, and not just community of vampires, but community of people, and how she created that community throughout her immortal life. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the spin on the vampire tropes in particular, with the way the homeland soil was used and just some of those vampire tropes, retooling them. I thought the way that Jewelle Gomez recreated those was very fascinating, but the way that the omniscient narrator was handled in combination with the structure of the story just didn't really work for me as a reader, and I just didn't love the turn to dystopian that this had at the end of the book. Those are just personal things for me and like the types of writing that I enjoy reading, but I enjoyed the concepts, I enjoyed the story, I really loved what this book was saying, and I definitely check out more by the author. I think this author has mostly, I think, poetry and nonfiction collections, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to double check on Storygraph, but I did enjoy the Gilda stories. I'm glad I finally read it. This was definitely way ahead of its time, and it's really cool to read a book that came out in the 90s and had so many interesting things to say about vampirism, and especially the Black queer experience, and using that within a vampire story. I thought that was really neat. So I definitely recommend y'all check this out if you're interested in vampire stories and you haven't read it before. And in particular, I would recommend the 20th anniversary edition, which has that introduction, the foreword, the afterword, that just provides a lot of context and makes the reading of this book a whole lot stronger, at least for me. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I finished the Gilda stories. I'm excited about it because I've had that one on my TBR forever. So it feels good to finally check it off my TBR list. And then I also picked up on audiobook The Route of Ice and Salt by Jose Luis Zarate, and this one originally came out in 1998, which is pretty cool. This one also has an introduction by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and it was really cool to listen to the fact that this kind of like got buried. It was released in the 90s, and it just felt, again, kind of like the Gilda stories, a little bit ahead of its time, and it's being reinvigorated. Like the copy that I picked up, the English translation, came out in 2022. So I just think that is so cool when books that were published a while ago get like a new second breath, especially when they're things that are really good works of fiction. They just, you know, were either like ahead of their time or just poorly received for some reason, and I'm excited that they get like a second wind. So an hour into this one, I have 2 hours left. I'm very intrigued. There's not much to say about it because it is so short, but it does follow the crew of the ill-fated voyage of the Demeter. If you are familiar with Dracula, then you know that the Demeter is the ship which Dracula takes to England. So I'm really intrigued to read this one, and I also wanted to watch The Voyage of the Demeter. It came out last year, and it also chronicled this very ill-fated boat journey from Dracula, and I tried to find it multiple places. I googled it. It said it was available on Hulu. It's not available on Hulu. I have Hulu, but it says you have to have an add-on, which is so annoying when you look something up and it says it's available on a streaming service you have, and then it turns out you need an add-on. That's just so annoying. And then it said that it was available on Paramount Plus, so we went to that. We tried to watch it there, and you needed Showtime, which is an add-on. It's too much. Stop it. Stop it. The streaming services are just out of control, and it's just very frustrating. So we went to Tubi, which has been like my favorite platform for at least the past year. It's free to use. It is not sponsored whatsoever, but if you are a horror fan and you don't mind having ads in your movie and TV content, Tubi is a great free streaming service, and they have especially a ton of backlist horror. Like, they have movies from like the 20s all the way up until recent day, but I really enjoy looking at their backlist of 70s and 80s horror in particular. So we decided if we couldn't watch The Voyage of the Demeter, then we would watch Nosferatu the Vampyre, because that movie is coming out, or at least an adaptation of Nosferatu is coming out at the end of this year in December. So I wanted to make sure that I saw the classic. I enjoyed it. The imagery in this one was just so cool, so unsettling from the very first frame in this movie. Just the atmosphere and the gothic setting and vibe and ambiance was very incredible. So we watched Nosferatu the Vampyre, which was the 1970s remake of the 1922 film. I would love to get my hands on and watch the 1922 version before, again, the Eggers production comes out in December of this year. So looking forward to that. I had a lot of fun with it. Definitely a vampire movie classic. So I have my audiobook. This is going to be my physical book, and I'm excited. I've read from Hailey Piper before and enjoyed her work, and I'm intrigued. This is a very short novella. I believe it's less than 200 pages, and I've heard good things, so I'm excited. I'm going to go get to reading, and I will check back in later with another reading update. Okay, so I just finished The Route of Ice and Salt, and I would not recommend it. I would not recommend it. It's only 3 hours long, which is why I ended up finishing it. 3 hours for me is not a long time to dedicate to a book, because I listen to audiobooks while I'm doing other things. So I don't mind that I read it, and I wanted to give it a shot because I was really intrigued. I love Dracula, and I just think the concept of following the voyage of the Demeter is so cool, and this didn't do it. I understand what this was trying to say. It was equating like homosexuality, because we're following the captain of the Demeter, and he is really struggling with queerness and struggling with being attracted to and loving other men, and having that desire, that passion, that hunger, that thirst, like that integrated with vampirism, like having that be a parallel between his unnatural and unholy thirst for other men, and then Dracula's unnatural, unholy thirst for other men, like obviously in very different ways. That's interesting. I like that discussion. I think that's fascinating, but the first 50% of this in particular did not deal with vampires at all, which I can hold out. This is not like that long, so I don't think, you know, there was a lot of page count, which, okay, we love a slow burn. Let's hear this book out. But there were so many descriptions of the captain's desires, and in like a very weirdly explicit way, including rats. So yeah, that not for me, not for me. There's a lot of discussion about the captain's dreams and his more erotic dreams, and just the way in which his psyche really interprets and really self-flagellates because of his queerness, which is sad, and that journey is interesting in literary format. It's obviously such a tragedy that real people, and then obviously characters as well, like have to deal with feeling like you are unholy and bad and evil and wrong. I'm using all of these air quotes because obviously that's not the case. Queerness isn't evil, but that journey is interesting. The parallels of that with Dracula and vampirism are interesting, but I just hated the way that this went about it. And again, was not anticipating so many erotic descriptions involving rats. So yikes. But I will say the last like 45 to 30 minutes of this one, excellent. It was excellent. If the whole entire novella would have been like that, this would have been 5 stars. Like when we finally get to meet Dracula and get to talk with Dracula and have vampirism, like the horror in this is good. When the horror actually starts happening, like again around the 50% mark is when things really start happening and men start disappearing, and that part, that horror aspect, those horror aspects are really good. Just the first 50% was a little bit of a thematic hot mess just in terms of description. So yeah, I cannot in good conscience recommend this, which is frustrating because again, when this was good, this was good. The last 40 to 30 minutes, the conversations with Dracula and the back and forth between Dracula and the captain were so good. Just the things that I did not like about this one just really didn't work for me. So unfortunately, this was a miss for me. I was really hoping that this was going to be like a diamond in the rough, a hidden gem, but it was not. Alas, we move on. We are coming up on the end of this vlog and the last 2 books that I'm reading for this vlog. So yesterday I started Queen of Teeth by Hailey Piper, and I'm intrigued. This starts off with our main character waking up and discovering that she has teeth downstairs between her legs. Obviously very concerning. You wake up and this happens and you want to find out what's going on. So she goes to the doctor to figure out what's going on down there, and then she kind of enters into this cat and mouse chase because our main character Yaya has already had health issues in the past because she just assumes that this is a side effect of a rare genetic condition that was caused by alpha beta pharmaceutical decades ago when she and several thousand others were still in the womb. So throughout her whole entire life she's been dealing with this pharmaceutical error, and the pharmaceutical company is taking care of her and her condition because they caused it. Now when this new development happens and goons from this pharmaceutical company come after her, she realizes that this may not be like a side effect of the genetic condition that she already has, but perhaps she has been the victim of further experimentation, and I think it's a cat and mouse game running from this pharmaceutical company while her body continuously changes. So obviously body horror, I think cosmic horror a little bit as well, I'm not sure. I'm already very grossed out and fascinated, and I'm really eager to continue on with this story. So we're reading this physically, and then I have my little tandem read because I'm going to listen to the audiobook as well as read the physical copy of The Picture of Dorian Gray. I'm excited for this one. This has been like, I think, one of the oldest books on my TBR, because when I first got back into reading as an adult, I feel like myself, as well as like, I feel it's very common when you get back into reading as an adult and you're like, okay, I have to read the classics, right? Like I have to read, you go and see all these lists of like 100 books to read before you die. I have a lot of thoughts on those lists, but I just feel like this is a classic that has been on my radar forever, and I'm intrigued. Now me and classic horror actually get along pretty well. I love Dracula, I love Frankenstein, I love Carmilla. Like gothic classics really tend to work for me, so I'm really excited to read this one, and I just feel like it's a concept that I've seen done a lot, so I know the basic story, but I'm eager to read the original. And I feel like this library copy is super cool. Like it feels like a classic book. So yeah, that's my plans. These books could not be more different in terms of tone. Like Queen of Teeth is a very experimental body horror, and then of course The Picture of Dorian Gray is a gothic classic. So yeah, we're gonna read both of these. I anticipate finishing this one first because it is a whole lot thinner than Dorian Gray, but I'm excited about both of these. I will check back in tomorrow with another reading update. Hey vlog, happy weekend. So I finished Queen of Teeth by Hailey Piper, and overall I thought this was a fun, very cosmic body horror time. If you like Venom, yes, Venom, the Marvel anti-hero, then I think you would enjoy this one. It was short, it's less than 200 pages, very graphic body cosmic horror novella. I enjoyed this. Hailey Piper is a new to me author. I have read 2 of her works this year, and I really enjoy her cosmic horror and what she brings to that subgenre. So yeah, very fun, very interesting time. I don't think I've read, and I don't think I'll ever read another book with this premise because the premise is just absolutely wild. So yeah, I enjoyed this more than I thought I would, because I'm really hit or miss on body horror. But yeah, this is a fun time. This is a fun time. I am also 4 chapters into The Picture of Dorian Gray, and I would recommend, especially if you have issues or troubles getting into classic books, to try listening to the audiobook while you read along. That has been such a great reading experience for me, and I'm really enjoying this audiobook production. I know there's quite a few different audiobook productions. The one that I'm listening to is narrated by Simon Vance, and I am enjoying the way that he is differentiating the characters, and I'm having a good time with it so far. It definitely feels like a very accessible classic, especially in the way that I'm reading it, and I can't wait to get further into this book. But that is going to be it for this clip. For the rest of the weekend, I am planning on reading and finishing The Picture of Dorian Gray, and then it will be time to wrap up this vlog. So I'm going to go enjoy my weekend, read a little bit more, and I will check back in with y'all later with another reading update. Okay, so we have finally made it to the final clip in this vlog. I did in fact finish The Picture of Dorian Gray, and I'm really glad that I read this book. I had mentioned earlier on in the vlog that I was familiar with this story. I feel like it's one of those stories, even if you haven't read it, you kind of know the premise. It gets referenced a lot in other media in particular, like just as one of the many examples, Dorian Gray is like a side character in The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. So it is a story and a character that get referenced over and over again, and I think partly it's one of the reasons why I had put off reading it for so long, because I know I always wanted to read this. It was a classic I was interested in, but I just thought that I knew the story. And even though you do know the story, it's about a young man named Dorian Gray who makes a Faustian bargain, and he does not age, but then a portrait of him does age for him. So I thought I knew it, you know, I thought I knew the story, and I think that's in large part why it has taken me so long to pick this up. But I'm here to tell you, even if you think that you know this story, I would recommend checking the book out if it interests you. I would definitely say that the way that I read this one, I read it physically and listened to it at the same time, and I think that really helped. I would not say that this is the most accessible classic. It's pretty short, it's less than 300 pages, but just the way that it's written, and it's like very character driven, and the description and just all of it, like I would say that this probably is one where you want to have already read some gothic fiction before, so you know what you're getting into in terms of tone. And this one, you know, I really would recommend you listening to it and reading it, because that really helped me really understand and grasp the full picture of this book. If you're new to classics and you want to pick up a horror classic, I would recommend probably either Dracula or Frankenstein. I actually think that those are really easy classics to pick up, especially if you're intimidated by classics. But I enjoyed this one. You know, it's tragic, it's gothic, it's tragic, and just even though you know the end and you know the story, just thinking about it, especially also in terms of context in Oscar Wilde's own life, this is a tragic one. Of course, I'm referring to, we'll do a little tiny deep dive on Oscar Wilde. He actually was imprisoned during his lifetime for lewd acts with another man, aka being gay. Oscar Wilde was was a gay man in a period in time where you could not be gay. I mean, you could, and obviously people are, you can't change that part about yourself, but it was criminal. It was criminalized to be gay. So reading just, and this isn't even like the newer edition that's like the uncut and uncensored, like reading the angst and the self-loathing and just the hurt and the themes around that in here, it really gets to you. I think it really gets to you, especially when you know a little bit more about the author. A note that is in my edition that I have says that the parallels between Dorian's pursuit of self-destruction and Wilde's own life are startling. In 1895, Wilde was jailed after an unsuccessful libel suit exposed his homosexuality. After 2 years in prison, he returned to London to find his reputation destroyed. Shunned by those who once flocked around him and refused publication, he spent the rest of his days traveling throughout Europe, living in one shabby lodging after another until his death in Paris in 1900. In this world, there are only two tragedies, Wilde once wrote. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it. I just thought overall this was really fascinating. Now, I was intrigued by the way this story was told, because even though it's the picture of Dorian Gray, you assume Dorian Gray is the main character, and in fact, he obviously is. The way that this is told, a large portion of this book, we're not like viewing it through Dorian's eyes. We're not really following Dorian. I would equate it to The Great Gatsby, how you don't follow Jay Gatsby. Jay Gatsby is the main character, but you're following Nick, who is the main character, but he's very much like a very passive main character that sits back and watches and tells you, the reader, about everything that's happening. Like, we see Dorian Gray from so many different perspectives throughout this. There are some chapters, especially during the end, that we follow Dorian Gray, but for a large portion of this, especially in the beginning, especially like the first, I'd say 5 or 6 chapters, we're not seeing Dorian through Dorian's own eyes. We're seeing him through the eyes of other people. So that's really fascinating. Be warned, going into this one, it's an old book. A lot of it doesn't age well. The conversations between men in here, especially discussing women, are just awful. In particular, Sir Henry, just he's got some ideas and he thinks he's so progressive, and he's really not. It's hard to read. I muscled through it. That was like the least engaging part. I really don't like that character. I understand he's very important to the plot and what he does and what he brings about in terms of Dorian's character development, but just every single thing that came out of that man's mouth was just so grating to me. But I feel like if you pick up a book that was published in the 1890s, then you're probably already expecting some sort of datedness from the narrative. So I enjoyed this one. And overall, I would say this was definitely a really successful vlog. I really enjoyed getting to a number of books that were on my TBR for a long time. So I definitely managed to cross off some books on my backlist TBR, read some classics, had a great time doing it. I hope everyone has had a happy Pride Month. I know this video is coming out towards the end of Pride Month, so I hope everyone got to just enjoy Pride Month, read some good queer fiction, and just remember, you are missing out if you're not reading queer fiction every single month of the year. In particular, at least for me, queer horror fiction, because I just love the commentary. I love social commentary horror, and I think that queer authors, both in the past and in the present, bring so much to the genre. So I hope y'all had a very happy Pride Month. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel for all of the bookish, horror, and cozy gaming content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye!